Hello folks! Today we'll be making a cactus material in Substance Designer, and you can see a cool render of the cactus material and of the thorns, and a short video to show you the tessellation. And this is the texture that we're going to be making today. So first, a quick preview. This is what we'll have at the end, or something close to it. And this here is our substance graph. We'll start with a base, we will add some details, we'll add some holes. The flowers bit are actually those holes, and merge all that into our final outputs to get this final result. Let's dive in and see how it's made. First, let me quickly say that we just have a normal set to 8 and an RT ambient occlusion node that the height scale of it is set to 0.03. And to be able to see the height map we are working on better, make sure to go to Materials, Edit Properties, and on the height scale, increase it. I've set mine to 5. And on the renderer, go to Edit Settings, and on the tessellation factor, I've set mine to 6. You just want to have something, because if you don't set it, the shapes just won't show up as good on your screen as what you're seeing here. To start our height off, we'll get a gradient linear 3, and we'll set the tiling to 11 and the rotation to 90 degrees. And this is what we'll have. Now, we want to make this cactus a bit smoother, so you get an invert grayscale and you blend those two together using max whiten, and you'll see what this does here, the before and after. Those crevices get pushed up a little bit. Then we'll get a clump grayscale, which will flatten the tops a little bit, and if there's any darks below 0.15, we'll just push them up to 0.15. After that, we'll get another gradient, but this time gradient linear 2, and we'll set the tiling to 11 and the rotation to 90. And this is what you should have. And the purpose here is to flatten our image a little bit more, or just to have that option. Currently, I've set a non-uniform blur to 0, and the bottom is this gradient linear here. And if I feed that into the transform, nothing happens. But if I increase the intensity, you can see that the tops are getting blurred and they are getting rounder and rounder. So this is a nice parameter to have, but for now I'll leave it to 0. And we'll just do a blur HQ grayscale with a value of 1.6, and this will flatten both our valleys and our crevices. Then, to make the shape a little bit more interesting, we get a directional warp with a purlin noise set to scale 3. And using that, intensity is 10, and you can use any angle. We just want to deform the shapes a little bit. Then you get a transform, you get the purlin noise, you divide it once, and just tile it, offset it, make it a different noise, something like that. And we'll use that into a second directional warp, but this time the intensity is set to 2. And what this will give us is a little bit more variation in our shapes. Then we will use that same transform node into a blend node. So we will blend our base shape with our purlin noise set to multiply, and here I've set it to 0.3, and this will just give a little bit more variation to our height. So if we disable that, you can see how this changes. And then I'm adding a histogram range and pushing the shapes a little bit further down, just so we can layer more shapes on top. We don't really want to get a complete one value, a full white, so we are just darkening the whole image a little bit. And this is the base of our cactus. Everything else is adding details on top of our main shapes. So let's see how we'll continue this. Next, we'll add some details to our main height. And we'll do that by adding a grunge map 008. I've set the balance to 0.25 and the contrast to 0.66. Then I warp it with a directional warp with an auto levels from our main height. And the directional warp is set to 5, let's say. You can use any angle here, honestly. And we blend that with our base height. And to see the result, you can see that we've added just a little bit of noise and it's set to multiply 0.02. My idea here is to not go crazy because we don't really want all of this happening. We just want some kind of surface noise. And then to not use another expensive grunge, because you can see that's 103 milliseconds, that's a lot. I like to get a transform node, get that grunge into here, maybe rotate it, offset it a little bit, and we can use that as a completely new grunge noise. So that's what I've done here. Then get a non-uniform directional warp. As the primary input, we get that transformed grunge. As the intensity map, we get our main height, and the warp angle is the directional warp. Then we simply blend that on top using max whiten, and you can see it's not making a whole lot of noise on top, but that's what we want, because if you pump that value higher, you get that noisiness again, and for me this is too much as well, so I'll go to 0.04, so it's 2 zeros and a 4. And then we want to add some more height variation. So we get a purlin noise. I've set the scale to 7. And with purlin noise, to save on performance, you can almost always just set its size to absolute and set it to 8 or 256 pixels. And this will give us even more height variation in our shapes. So you can see what we have here and what we have here. Then we will blend some more noise on top of that, and you can see those extra shapes that we are getting here. And how we are making those, I've called them cell details. Let's start from the beginning. Again, it's a purlin noise. The scale is set to 7. So basically, if we are doing something like that, we can reuse the same noise. But in this case, we'll first make the graph, and if you want, we can optimize after that. So set it to absolute anyway, get a cells 2. I've set the scale to 11 and the edge width to 0.42. Get a non-uniform directional warp, and the cells 2 is both as a primary input and a warp angle map. And the intensity map is our purlin noise. Intensity is 26. I've set the warp angle to 108, and you can see all the other parameters here. Then we get a directional warp with a scaled purlin noise, and here I've set the scale to 30, so we get something really small. And even, let's see, we can go step by step and see how this is changing along the way. So first we have this, then the non-uniformed warp, we have something like this, so the shapes are getting more organic. Then again, we get another directional warp, and we use a crystal. The scale is set to 11, and on the directional warp you can see the intensity. So if we get that there, those are getting even more variation. And then we get to the sphere gradient mapper. That's a custom node that I am using, and this will be shared, so you can just download it and use it as well. But first, let's break it down. What this does, it's trying to map a sphere inside of every shape, and it's based on a flat fill. So how I made this custom node, I get a flood fill, then we get a flood fill to gradient, and basically you want to copy this flood fill to gradient, do a 45 degrees, but I think I even did it at 30 degrees, copy those two, then you do 60 degrees, 90 degrees, copy all of those again, 120 degrees, 150, 180, 210, copy a bit more flood fills, 240, 270, 300, and 330. We don't need 360 because that's basically 0. Then we start blending those with a multiply. First we blend those, then we blend those, and so on and so forth. We just want to map a sphere inside each shape. So we'll get something like that, then just duplicate those, copy them like that, and you're probably seeing where this is going. So we'll do that again, and we'll do that, and then on all the levels at the end, and voila, we now have the spheres mapped. I'll share this sphere gradient mapper so you can use it. There's some parameters to it that I've exposed in my node, but that's the general logic for it. So let's get rid of those. Then we do an invert grayscale. So now the shapes are going in. Then we do a non-uniform blur, and we use our main noise in both inputs. I've set the samples to maximum and the blades to maximum, and the intensity is 3.16. And if we go here, you can see that they almost vanished, but they are still giving us that surface variation that was missing before. And just in case, I'm doing on all two levels. So that's for the cell details. Now let's see what comes next. The next bit is adding more details to our height map. So you get a Perlin noise. I've set it to scale 128. We want something super tiny. We again warp it with our main height. And you can see the effect here. It's set to 6. We don't really want to overdo it. And the roles of all those directional warps is to just make the noises adhere more to our base height. You can skip it, but that's a good step to make a more natural material. Then we simply overlay that at 0.01, and the variation is not that much, but after we add some roughness, you'll see it. You can see that if we pump that, you're getting that bumpy surface, and we don't really want that now. It's just a small noise. Then we add the vertical details. So at the end, we'll have something like that. And let's rotate a bit to see what this is doing. See, like we have a vein here. We want to add more verticality to our shape. And we'll go step by step. Start with an anisotropic noise, and that's with the default settings. This is what it will look like by default. Then we do a non-uniform directional warp. It's set to 9. And what we are using here as both inputs is our main height. Let's see how this changes. Then we do a blur HQ grayscale, or you can use the regular blur, intensity set to 2. And this changed the shapes quite a lot. You can pump it a bit more to see. So we are cutting at the tops, we are adding at the bottom. That's what we want, more and more variety. Then we want to make another non-uniform directional warp, but first get a Perlin noise. I've set the scale to 25. Again, you can set that to be 256. We do an invert grayscale of our main height, and we use that as the warp angle. Intensity map is the Perlin noise, and primary input is our main noise. The intensity is set to 2.26, and you can see how this changes things with it or without it. And then we blend that to our main height. So each step is just adding more subtle noises to shape up our cactus. And here at the bottom, we do another non-uniform directional warp. We use the Perlin noise as the intensity, and we transform it, move it around a little bit, and use it as the warp angle. And the primary input is our main noise. You'll see what this will be used for later, but it's basically just some roughness variation, and just wanted to make it a little bit more interesting. Then we do an all two levels of the whole shape, and this is what our cactus is looking like now. We add a Gaussian spots, scale is set to 7, and we blend it with a linear dodge set to 0.01. This will basically add a little bit of bumpiness to the whole surface. Then we add a Gaussian spots one again, but this time it's set to scale 5. And I've added some disorder and another random seed. We do a histogram scan, position 0.15 and contrast 0.81. And we blend that with linear dodge again, and opacity is set to 0.05. And this will add some random spots across our cactus. Then we want to continue adding more and more tiny surface details. Now this is beginning to look more like a real thing, that we are adding more and more noises. So this one, get a fractal sum 1. Up top you can transform it to get a different noise. Below we just do a directional warp to adhere to the shape a little bit more, and you can see how this changes. And below here we have a non-uniform blur. The non-uniform blur here has our histogram scanned spots as the blur map, intensity set to 0.45, and you can see all the other parameters here. And we're using that as the intensity map for this directional warp. And on top of it, we blend it to get that extra noise. And we warp it again, the transformed fractal sum, but we have a different angle, and we blend it with an overlay set to 0.013. And you can see that each step is adding more and more tiny surface details. Then we have these wooden cuts, and let's see how this one goes. Then adding the wooden cuts as I've named them. It's these shapes, and we'll of course go step by step and see how they are made. And they start way up here on the vertical hose. We get a histogram select, and we are basically getting from our main height map. The histogram select I've set to 0.77 and range to 0.25. That's a parameter we can tweak later, but if you move that, you can see what this is doing to the cuts. Basically, we want to shave the tops off and go inside the cactus skin or the bark. Then we add a clouds tool. We simply multiply it on top of the shapes, and we get a Perlin noise scale 5, and we multiply it on top of the shapes again. Then we do a histogram scan set to 0.8 and contrast to 0.55 to get some more contrast. And if we use that directly, you see what we are getting now. It's not perfect, and we want to add those round holes too. And how we do that? We go up here to the flowers part of the... Adding the round holes is fairly simple. We start with a shape. You can see what pattern we are using here. Scale is set to 0.5. We do a histogram scan. Position is set to 0.8, contrast to 0.47. We blend that as the bottom input and the base shape as the top. And we set it to multiply 0.35. And you can see the difference here. We just want a more flattened look. Then we do a slope blur grayscale. Mode is set to min. You can see the values. With a Berlin noise set to scale 19. We can set the output size to absolute again. Then we want to add a little bit more surface noise. So we blend it with a crystal tool, a multi-directional warp with the base shape, and the intensity is 70. And you can see what this is doing. We just want to warp the noise around the shape. We then do a slope blur, again set to min, intensity is 0.8. We blend that with a subtract, and this is what we are getting. The subtract is 0.24 or 0.25. We then do a clump and we set the max to 0.67. The idea is to flatten the top again and just get these border details. After the clump, there's a slope blur, but looking at it, I've disabled it completely, so I'll just remove that. So we have a non-uniform blur, and both inputs are the main shape. Intensity is set to 18 and samples to 16. We do on auto levels, and then we blend the shape before the non-uniform blur with the non-uniform blur set to max whiten, and the intensity is 0.35. Then we do a tile generator grayscale. We set it to image input. I've set the amount to 11 on the X, 10 on the Y. What else do we have? We have scale set to 0.5, scale random to 0.15. When you scroll down to position, offset random, 0.23. Position random, X random is 0.02, Y is 0.135. And rotation random is set to max, which will have some effect, but not much currently. Then we warp those shapes with the same warps that we are using here. So you can just Control G to duplicate those and use them. And we split it into halves. This top one we'll see later, but for now we simply do a blur grayscale, intensity is set to 1, and we do a histogram scan. Position is set to 92, to 0.92. We then blur it again, 1.77. We do a non-uniform blur on our vertical shapes with our hose, and you can see what this is doing. Then we do a slope blur grayscale. It's set to min, and it's coming from this Berlin noise. Then we do another slope blur grayscale, but this time it is set to max. And basically this is pushing the shapes outward. Without it, we don't really have the blending. So we are not just adding those shapes, we are pushing them out from the base noise. And you can see that if we remove the blur, we can get something like that. And that is why the blur is a higher value here, so we can push the shapes out more. And from here, we use that shape, we slope blur it again with Berlin noise from before. Slope blur is set to min. We do a histogram scan, contrast set to 1 and position 0.92. We're basically getting a binary mask. We do a non-uniform blur, samples again 16 and intensity 1.5. We do a multi-directional warp grayscale. We warp the mask with the blurred shape, and we are getting these cuts, like similar to what a quantized node would usually get you, but a little bit different. And this will give this bark effect that we are going for. And then we just blend with a min darken. The primary input is the warped shapes, and the top input is our height data. And without it, you can see how sharp the shapes are. And the more we have, they'll blend more and more with the initial height, but we still want something to be seen. So 0.4 is a good value. And finally, we can blend that with our base height, and we simply subtract it from it. And if you go with a higher value, it won't really work well. So 0.12 works good in my case. You can pump it a little bit more, but I think it's fine. And these are the main visual interests of the material, and you'll see when we get to adding the covers, a more orange wooden cover compared to the green cactus. Then we want to add even more visual interest, and this is a tiny detail to improve our shapes. And if I blend it a bit more, you can see what is happening. So it's like adding the wooden fibers and veins, basically. And this happens up here. We have our vertical hose. We just have a non-uniform directional warp, and we use those both as the angle and the intensity map, and a simple quads too. And you can see the shapes we are getting here. Trail mode is max, intensity set to 1, and intensity we set it to 12. So we get these nice fibers. Then we add the wooden details on top. And of course, as a mask, we use this blurred image of our histogram scan. So we just get a blur, set it to 2, and use that as the mask here. Without it, you affect the whole shape, and we don't want that. We only want to affect the wooden cuts. And we now use the same mask again to blend more wooden fibers. And you can see that these are the fine noise details that we are missing currently. And I haven't done much here. We just get a directional noise too. It's angled at 90 degrees, so it's falling up. We do a directional warp with our cuts. And the intensity I've set it to 3.4, so we get some movement there, and we blend it using soft white. And as I said, this is what we are getting, but it is important that you use this blurred shape as our mask. Then comes the disabled part of the thorns, which for now I will skip, but if you get the original file, you can find it there, and you can add the thorns as well and see how they are made. Then we want to add holes for the flowers. In the end, I didn't add any actual flowers because I think the reference I had then didn't have the flowers, but still I wanted to be prepared if at any time I wanted to add the cactus flowers in their full bloom. And we start that with adding holes. Now let's go up and see how those holes are made. We go up to the flowers bit. Our directional warp ends here, so we do a blur HQ grayscale. It's set to 1.2, and we simply drag that down and we subtract from our main height. Then we add some more bumpy noise. And this is entirely driven from our holes. We want to make the main shapes bulge up where there are flowers and to go down where there aren't. And let's see how this is made. We now continue from our blurred shape here. We do a histogram scan. Position is set to 0.69 and contrast is set to 0.22. We do a bevel. Distance is set to 0.15 and smoothing to 3. Let's go with whole numbers. We do on auto levels and a directional blur to merge the shapes a little bit. If you can see, when we remove that, they are more spherical and we want them to just flow better with the whole image. So we use that to blend on top of our shape with an overlay of 0.6. Then we want to play around with the whole centers a little bit. As they're super blurry and they don't have much details now, we add that here. And how we make that, again, we go up top to the flowers bit. We do a blend with dirt 1 and multiply set to 0.1 and a equals 1. We blend that with a multiply of 0.3. We do a slope blur grayscale set to min using a crystal noise and the scale is set to 53. And the intensity of the slope blur is 0.02. Then we do on auto levels a histogram scan where the position is set to 0.6, which basically increases the contrast a little bit. And then we drag this into several different inputs. We do a multi-directional warp grayscale with itself set to average and the intensity is 1. And we use that here to multiply against our original shape, and without it, you can see they are just random blurry blobs, but with it we add some edges and some cuts. And to get our mask, I did a quick edit just now, but it's the same thing. We just get the shape that we're working on now. We do a little blur, 0.44. We do a threshold of 0.1. And we use that as the mask for our holes. Then we want to add a little bit of organic noise. And you can see what this is. And without it. And how we make that, we go up top and this whole part is the organic damage. We start with a sales 3, scale is set to 9 and hardness to 1. We do an invert grayscale, a non-uniform blur. You can see all the parameters here. Again, we use a Perlin noise, default scale of 32. We do a multi-directional warp grayscale, 3.6 intensity, and we warp it with the blurred and inverted image of our shape. And if we zoom in, you can see that we are getting these vein-like or root-like features. We slope blur that, samples 11, intensity 0.17 with a clouds 2. We then do a clump because we don't want too much outstanding white colors. You can see here. We do on auto levels, so they're all kind of in the same range. We do a non-uniform directional warp grayscale, and for it we use a black and white spots too. And we don't really need this transform here. So just a black and white spots too. And it's set to average, intensity is 5.8. And we have trail length set to 1. So it's a little bit better blended. Again, non-uniform directional warp grayscale with a Perlin noise of scale 4. You can see what's happening here. You can see all the parameters. We slope blur that with our clouds too. And again, we slope blur it with itself, but with its blurred version, 0.43. And we also do an invert. So if you do slope blur with an invert, you get those real crisp shapes that are pushing against each other, and that's what we are going for here. We then do a normal. We set the intensity to 15 and do a facing normal. And you can see what shapes we are getting with it. Then again, we slope blur it with our clouds too, but this time I've taken a transform node I've tiled it twice, and you can move it around or rotate it, whatever you'd like. We are just making the noise with a bigger frequency. And we swap word intensity of 0.02, samples 15. We do an invert grayscale. And that's the organic noise that we just made ourselves. And that's a pretty cool way of generating organic shapes. And most of it comes from this bit here, and from using the normal and facing normal to get all that data. Then we do a histogram select, position 0.92, range 0.25. We do a final directional warp with our base height, just to make it stick to the shapes a little bit better. You can see the difference, they're going a little bit up. And this we are blending with a subtract from our main height. You can try some other blending modes, like you can make this look like veins, but in our case we want this to be kind of like damage. And with that, we are done with our height map. Now we can start working on extracting some more data to make our roughness and our color. Now we can start working on our color map, and I'll get rid of this uniform color node for now. I'll get a transform node, and let's see what's the first bit. So this will be our initial color, and to get it right, at the end of our height map, we do a normal. I've set the intensity to 10, a curvature smooth. I'm getting the curvature input and a gradient map. And I've sampled some green colors that I felt would match the reference I had. Then we want to get some masks. And I'll go through all those masks first, and then we'll go through every bit and see what they're doing. I wanted some directional masks in this case. Usually I will simply go for the convex and concave shapes and use them, but in this case I wanted something different. So we do an RGBA split, we get the green channel, so we get the up. We do a small blur and a levels, and you can see how the sliders are here, or if you want to copy the values themselves. I do a slope blur grayscale, and here with a clouds 2. For the bottom part it's almost the same, but I flip the white and black channels. So basically this levels is like having an invert first. And this top one is getting all the faces that are facing up, and this one is getting all the faces that are facing down. Again, the same slope blur. And I even then blend it with a transformed version of our clouds 2, going through a histogram scan, position 0.25, contrast 0.7, let's say, and we subtract that just to add a little bit of variation, so it's not all the faces that are facing up. And we use that as a mask. Up here we just have an HSL node, whiteness 0.43 and saturation 0.52. And this will give us some color variance on the shapes that are facing up. Then we have the next one, which will give us this green patch. And basically we have an HSL node, whiteness is set to 0.55 and hue 0.51. The mask that we're using here is our top mask that we made, so all the slopes facing up. A histogram scan with the clouds noise 2 again, but it's transformed in a different way. And this time histogram scan 0.36 for the position, 0.69 for the contrast. We do a blend, and this will be the mask, so not everything is colored the same. See if we have that. Now this feels much better. And then we have this curvature mask. This is coming from the second input of the curvature smooth and a levels, and I'm trying to get the edges of the cuts And we just want to emphasize their shape a little bit. Again, we're blending an HSL node, whiteness 0.56 and saturation 0.46. And here comes the first part where we are adding the wooden bits of the cactus. So we add this brown orange cover, and the mask for it comes from all the way down here, the flower mask that we used before. And the cover itself is coming from two different gradient maps. And we are using the same curvature smooth. And the first gradient map is this one. The second gradient map is this one. We blend them together with a random mask for each different hole. And to get that mask, we will go all the way back here from the directional warp on the flowers tab. We do a histogram scan, contrast set to 1, position 0.9. We do a flat fill and a flat fill to random grayscale. So we get a different value for each shape. We blend those. And I did a small HSL tweak, saturation 0.43 and whiteness 0.49. And that's what we are blending here. Then we add a little bit more details on top. So on HSL, we darken it, whiteness 0.48, saturation 0.52, and color 0.495. And this mask here is again coming from our random IDs, but it's using a histogram scan, contrast 0.81 and position 0.34. After that, we want to add a little bit of wooden cover on our cuts. And you can see that here. That's just the first bit. The mask for it comes from this bark masks bit. We have this blend here, and if we go back a little bit more, how do we get this? So we add a blend from our height before we add the holes for the flowers, and we divide that with the shape before we add the wooden cuts. So we can see from these two, we get the last one and this one here. We get where the cuts are supposed to be. We invert that. We do a histogram scan, position 0.97, contrast 0.92. And then we multiply that with our wooden cuts noise that is giving us the fibers. And we split that into 4 different masks. A histogram select, position 0.26 and range 0.22. Another histogram select, position is 0.43, another 0.73 and another 0.99. And the last one, the range is set to 0.34. So basically we're getting the mask for a few different layers, and we want the different layers to have different colors. This makes the shape a bit more natural. And on all of them, we are blending with the flower random ID, but just using the mask from it. And we want to make sure that we do not add shapes there, like we don't want to add any different color where we have the holes. And each of these now we start to blend. The first one is using the top mask here, and it adds the first layer. The second one is using the second mask and the HSL for it. So first we have an HSL to modify the base wood, and it's set to 0.4 and saturation 0.56. Then we have another HSL 0.48 and 0.49. We use that with the second mask. Then we have another HSL. This time we are whitening it up, whiteness 0.53 and saturation 0.48. We blend that on the inside, and you can see how each layer adds more and more color to those cuts. And the final one, the first HSL we have up here, we blend that with the final mask down here. So basically each mask has a different HSL value, and we blend them in in order to get that wooden feel of all those deep cuts. And then we start adding some more organic random details to all the shapes. So first we add some random color variation, and what the mask for this is, we get a equals 1, scale is set to 2, a histogram scan, position 0.28 and contrast 0.77. We blend that with the innermost mask, so the fourth mask, with multiply, and we use that HSL, which is 0.6 on the saturation and whiteness, with a copy and set to 0.6 to 0.86. If you want, you can add even more, but I think this feels good. Then we whiten the outer bits here a little bit. So the HSL is just whiteness 0.55, and the mask from the wooden cuts mask, an edge detect, roundness is 0, width is 1, so we get these outer bits of the cuts. And we swope blur that with a clouds 2. I'm just using this one. You can use anything to swope blur it with. Intensity 0.12. Do a histogram scan 0.86 to 0.58. Then swope blur it again just a little bit with a clouds 2 again. But this time I'm using the top one. And this goes into the mask to get this outer whiter area. Then we do another pass, and we are just adding some different color variation here. We do a histogram scan of the curvature smooth from here, from the base one. We blur it a little bit, and the HSL is 0.55 and 0.55 for saturation and whiteness, and hue is 0.49. And the copy is set to something really low, like 0.2. If we bump it up, you can see what's happening. So that's just a bit more whiter and vibrant color that we don't have. After that, we do one more, and that's more like dirt or dust. It's not really dust, so we'll just call it dirt. We use this HSL up top, and we make another one. We make it a little bit wider, 0.51, and more saturated, 0.52. And for the mask, we go all the way here, the green channel, and this clouds too. Invert the green channel. We do a histogram scan, position 0.43 and contrast 0.95. We blur it 0.02, and we swope blur it with that clouds too that I just showed. And the blur is set to 0.18. We use that as the mask, and this is what's giving us those dark browner spots. Then we add a little bit more detail, and you can see here it's for the organic damages. We do an HSL, saturation is 0.62 and whiteness is 0.46. And the mask for it comes from all the way back here. It's straight up this directional warp. After that, we do one more blend, and this time you can see if I increase it, we want to get the edges of the organic shapes. If we go back here, I am doing a threshold of 0.001, then an edge detect to get the outer bits, and we use that as the mask, and just a gradient map. We are not adding any color, just blending that using screen, and the intensity is 0.045. And you can see it's not much of a difference, but it still adds that lip to it and makes it pop a little bit more. And the final bit of the color, we are adding those stone-like pebbles. We do an HSL, whiteness is 0.67. We just want it almost white. And the mask for this comes from all the way back here, if you can see. Remember these Gaussian spots and histogram scan that we added here? We take it up. We don't need this transform since it's not doing anything. We do a histogram scan on it, 0.95 for position and 0.92 for contrast. And that's just the binary mask that we are using to add those random stone features. And with that, we have our cover done. Let's see how we are making our roughness map. I start with a uniform cover and it's set to grayscale and the value is 0.04. So we have this. Then I'm adding this custom noise. If you remember the vertical details, here they are. I'm just blending those on overlay with a strength of 0.1, with a 0.1, and we get something like that. Then the organic noise that we had, we blend it with a subtract set to 0.02. Not much of a difference, but that's how we are building up to a bigger thing. You can see how the map changes. Then from all the way back from the grunges, this first grunge, the directional warped one, we add it on top using soft white and a value of 0.05. Then we add the other grunge, the top one, with an add sub blending mode and value set to 0.03. And you can see how this is shaping up. And then we want the stones or the pebbles to be glossier than everything else, so we just subtract them, and that's simply coming from the beginning here. Then we want the wooden bits to not be as smooth as everything else, so getting the wooden cuts from here, we blend that with an add linear dodge set to 0.2, and you can see now that they are rougher. Then we add the holes here from the flower mask. We add it as a linear dodge, again set to 0.2. And just for a little bit more variation, we get our organic noise, the directional warp here, and we subtract that with a value of 0.24. So it's kind of like trying to imitate that it's kind of a greener liquid inside the cactus. And then we have the mask of the edges. We add that linear dodge with a value of 0.23 to remove any shininess on the actual skin of the cactus. And with that, our roughness is done too, and we have a finished cactus material. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this one. Let me know in the comments what type of texture do you want me to make a tutorial of next, or what kind of Substance Designer breakdown you want to see from me. Cheers and see you next time.